Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. My guest today is Stephanie Clarke, a sexual violence counselor at the Willow Centre, who is here to talk about the Take Back the Night event taking place September 27th across Charlotte County in St. Stephen, St. Andrews, and St. George. Thank you, Stephanie, so much for coming into the studio today.
Thank you, Vicki, for inviting me.
Let's start by talking about Take Back the Night. What the event is, it's a global movement. What's the history of it and what is it about?
So the first time that the Take Back the Night event happened was in England in 1877, which is quite a while ago. It was a women-led protest at the time, because there were women that were fearful of going out at night, and they wanted to raise awareness and just take a stand about it should be safe for them to go out. And then in 1978 is when it came to the States in San Francisco, a similar reason, and it's primarily around sexual violence at night, is that women wanted to feel safe to go outside without being sexually violated. And so that took place in 1978, and since then it has been happening globally across the world. It's the events usually take place in the end of September to October, and they are marches. Sometimes they do like speeches, different types of events to just raise awareness and give voice to survivors who've experienced sexual violence.
Now, this year the event in Charlotte County is taking on a different shape. Tell us what you're organizing this year and why it's a little different.
Yeah, so historically it's been a lot of taking a stance on just raising the voice, making ourselves heard. And so this year we were thinking about doing something just a little bit different, of focusing on the restorative aspect of healing through coming into the nighttime and being allowed to just exist and be outdoors and doing normal things. So doing things that are good for us, existing and taking up space in an area that we might not have been able to feel comfortable taking up space. So we're bringing yoga this year. We had three amazing instructors volunteer their time. So that was Annabelle with SOL Yoga.
Oh, Annabelle Juno?
Yeah. And Trudy and Maria. And I'll let them introduce themselves at the event a little bit more, but we're really grateful for them to donate their time. And we're going to do just really light movements, so a lot of standing. We really wanted to make it accessible for everybody, so it's not going to be intense yoga by any means. And if you don't want to do yoga, you can come be there, just witness and participate in meditating, being mindful, just taking a break. It is a kid-friendly event, so we're going to have a kids' table set up with coloring things, with volunteers, youth volunteers, as well as parent volunteers from the community that are giving their time over the evening. And then we're going to have hot chocolate and cookies available after, just for a time of socialization and some closing remarks.
So do you know yet what locations will be used for these different events? Because St. George, St. Andrews, and St. Stephen, I imagine they'll probably take place at the same time in the different communities?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're going to have it take place at the exact same time. It'll be the same opening ceremony and closing ceremony in each community, and all the mayors were invited, so I'm pretty sure all the mayors will be there as well. And then in St. Stephen, it's going to be at the St. Stephen Wharf, and in St. Andrews it will be at Indian Point, and then in St. George it will be on the lawn located next to social development. It's a huge field lawn. And so we'll be doing it there. Mm-hmm.
You are a sexual violence counselor. You work one-on-one, also support group settings, but a mission like this is really community-oriented. Why are these movements so important when it comes to communities showing support?
It's really important for the community to show support. One, to raise awareness that it happens in our communities. And so when we show up as a community at these events, it shows survivors or victims of abuse that they're not alone, that these are people that will be allies, that will be supportive to them, to make them feel like they don't have to stay in those situations, they can reach out. And so it also raises awareness and prevents it in the community, because the more people that are aware that it's happening, the more people that are taking taking a stand, the more that we're talking about it and bringing it into our lives, and maybe even having new information that we didn't realize to look out for. And so it's trying to build community resilience is really the thing, is building a resilient community together.
When we look at statistics of abuse, can you tell us a little bit about just how common it is, the things we don't maybe see on the surface level of our community day in and day out?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak primarily to the sexual violence just because that's my role on the network. There are other statistics that are more based on like intimate partner violence and things like that, that other members of the network would be able to speak to. But in Charlotte County, I know there were 38 reports to the police in 2023 in just Charlotte County of sexual violence. And in those cases, we know that only 5% of people will report. So that's over 600 cases statistically that have taken place in Charlotte County just in 2023. And that we know of, and so that's happening in our home communities. That's happening around us, and so it's really important, especially with Take Back the Night being focused on sexual violence. We really want to build that awareness that it happens here in Charlotte County. And the other statistic that we don't think about is 1 in 4 women have experienced sexual violence, and 1 in 6 men. And so we often think of it as a women's issue, which it does happen to women and minorities more than it would happen to men. But that 1 in 6 is still a really high statistic. And for men, they have the barrier of not being able to talk about it. They don't talk about it very often, and it's uncomfortable, and it comes with a lot of stigma. And we don't think about it happening to men as often as we do women.
When we talk about resources in Charlotte County, I'm sure the nice thing about the event too is it does raise awareness for what resources do we have here in our community. You're at the Willow Centre, which I understand is a new organization, which I'm excited to learn more about. But tell us a little bit about just the general resources we have here in our community for people who might need them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the network is comprised of 9 organizations.
This is the Charlotte County Abuse Prevention Network?
Charlotte County Abuse Prevention Network. And so that's the network that's behind this event. We're, as the Willow Centre and the Sexual Violence Centre, we're spearheading it, but the whole network is a part of it and putting it on and making sure that it's happening and volunteering their time. And we have victim services here, so anyone who's experienced an assault can go through victim services and get free counseling, free legal support, get accompaniment to legal proceedings. We have social development that can help, especially around family things and housing and things like that. And then we have ourselves, the Willow Centre, so we offer counseling, we offer just advocacy and support in that way. So if clients do need support going into the hospital, or if they need to get connected with a SANE nurse, those are things that we can do. And supporting families of individuals that have experienced sexual violence. We can do presentations on sexual violence awareness and how can we prevent it, how do we support survivors and things like that. As well as support groups. And we have an outreach, Charlotte County Outreach. And so if you've ever experienced domestic violence or intimate partner violence, you can go through outreach. They can support you, again, with accompaniment advocacy. They can help you with legal things, writing affidavits, whatever kind of support you need. EIOs, so emergency intervention orders. If you need to go into your home or get things out of it, or if you need to be back in your home and that's a dangerous thing for you, you can apply for an EIO through the outreach program. And the transition house and second stage housing. And so we do have more resources. We're getting more resources in the community than we've ever had before. And all of those, and we have mental health and addictions. And so we're all trying to work together to figure out how do we support each other. Neighborhood works. So we all are networking in the background, trying to say how do we make sure that we're supporting each other, referring to each other, and that we're all getting on the same page, because that hasn't always been the case with service providers. And so we're trying to build that relationship with each other where we can lean on each other and know what supports are out there, so that we can be putting those out there to the community.
And I'm sure from a victim standpoint, it might seem overwhelming when you're looking to reach out for help, even knowing where to go. But I imagine with the connections of the prevention network, that you're able, if one person reaches out to one organization, to connect them with all the tools they need.
Yeah, and that's the goal, is that by building and networking that we're going to be able to do that. So when we put on these events that we're doing Take Back the Night, but we do events throughout the entire year, and so we'll have all of our resources available at those events. And the idea is that when someone does come to us, so if someone comes to me with intimate partner violence, I'm going to refer them to Desiree at Outreach to get in contact. Or if someone's dealing with addictions, I'll refer them to addictions and mental health. Or if someone needs housing, I might refer them to neighborhood work. So it's trying to really build on those relationships so that individuals and survivors are getting the best support that they can.
Tell us a little more details about the Willow Centre as a new institution in our community. What's the type of work you do, maybe in a little more detail?
Yeah, so I'm the sexual violence counselor at the Willow Centre. So my primary job is building counseling programs, whether it's individual counseling or group work. And we're going to have 2 counseling programs. We'll have one that's for doing trauma work and really getting in and doing trauma work around any violence that someone's experienced. And then the second group will be for people who are still in the war zone. And so what the war zone is anyone that's still actively in survival mode. Let's say they're homeless, they might be still living with an abuser, situations like that, living in a dysfunctional household, because we serve people who are 16 plus. And so you might have a teenager who's still living at home and just has to live in that environment. And so they might not be able to get in and do all of that trauma work because it's not safe for them to do so. So we have a counseling program that's accessible for individuals in that war zone to still get supports, because typically they miss out on supports because they're not ready to do that deeper trauma work. And so we wanted to make sure that we are filling that gap. So there's that program, and then the other one that is more trauma focused therapy. And then we're going to do support groups. We're going to do a family support group, a peer support group, and a psychoeducational group, which will be available to anyone in the community to go to and access, that will be learning about trauma and learning about emotion regulation skills. So it's got an emotional toolkit, and the group's called Healing Roots. And so it's just building on those healing tools.
What are some of the biggest barriers people face when it comes to reaching out for help, or even knowing they need help sometimes?
Yeah, a lot of times it's the stigma. It's really hard for individuals to want to reach out because there's a lot of stigma that comes along with that, a lot of disbelief, and fear that they're not going to be believed. I think I'd mentioned at one point, in Canada, there's roughly around 400,000 cases a year that get reported, keeping in mind only 5% report. And of those 400,000, only 1,000 of them make it to conviction. That's a huge gap of people that aren't making it to conviction. And so it's hard to come forward with information like that, knowing that your chances of seeing it go to conviction or seeing there be justice is low. So people will keep it to themselves. Also, people don't like to be seen as victims. And so whether it's within themselves, they don't want to see that, or they don't want to say that to other people. There's a denial of maybe it didn't happen. Maybe it was in my head, because that gives them a sense of control and makes them feel like it wasn't that bad. It was okay. Or maybe I was wearing something that I shouldn't have been wearing, or I shouldn't have put myself in this situation. When the reality is that it's never your fault that somebody abused you, no matter what.
Does it often happen too, when we look at statistics, that the sexual violence could come from someone you know quite well, maybe even a partner, and because of that relationship, you might not want to believe that that's what took place?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the statistic, and I'm not going to get this correct, I know it's in the 80s. I want to say 87, but I'll just say in the 80s. 80% of perpetrators are someone closely known to the person. So it could be a family member or a close family member, friend. And so it's very often that it happens really close to home, that's the other thing that's a myth that's out there, is that people are like, I don't want to walk alone at night, or I don't want to go out and do this, when in reality the times that it's happening is in the homes or in situations where you feel safe with people that you feel safe with. And that's not to cause fear, it's just to remove that stigma of when people do come forward, they didn't always they didn't put themselves in a situation where that would have happened to them.
And when we look at other complicating factors like addiction, I suppose there could be maybe guilt involved, where you think that you bring this on yourself, or maybe that you didn't remember fully what happened 100% and don't know to what degree you bear some responsibility. That could be a feeling.
Yeah, I see that in every person that I meet that's ever experienced any form of violence, whether it's sexual violence or any other kind of violence. And one of the things that I've noticed as a common theme is a part of us wants to believe that there was something we could have done differently. Because if we could have done something differently, that's in our control. That was something that we had control of, which means that we can prevent it from happening again. And so it's a really normal experience for individuals to experience that. It's hard because they might not necessarily have been able to like stop it, and it's not their fault. It's never someone's fault that got abused. And so it's a hard, I can't find the words. It's a hard cross to bear, I guess.
Could probably feel like a very gray area at times that would be extremely confusing to navigate.
Yeah, very much so.
When you are helping people unpack trauma, what are the biggest misconceptions about trauma to begin with?
What are the biggest misconceptions about trauma? I think one of the biggest misconceptions about trauma is that it's a big thing happened to you. I remember learning about trauma my first time, and someone said to me, like, have you ever heard of trauma? I said, well, yeah, PTSD. Like, you go to war, you get PTSD, or you have a car accident, you get PTSD. But one of the things that I didn't know about, and a lot of people don't know about, is that trauma is anything that makes you feel like your life is threatened. Anything that makes you be exposed to those survival skills for too long. And so there's big T trauma, which is event trauma, that is like getting in a car accident or experiencing something very traumatic. And then there's little T trauma, and that's referring to long exposure to smaller times of feeling unsafe. So we think of developmental trauma, and this is something that adverse childhood experiences screening. And so when you screen, that was a study that was done in the years 1994 and 1995, and I think there's 17,000 participants in it. And what they found was that they were looking for physical health outcomes at that time. And what they found was that individuals who had experienced a 3 or above on a 1 to 10 scale of questions, what they found was that those individuals were at a higher risk for things like cancer, obesity, diabetes. Since then, there's been more studies that have said depression, anxiety, and symptoms of trauma. Because when you're a child and you don't have food, you don't understand necessarily why you don't have food, or that isn't a life-threatening thing. Or when you're a child and your parent isn't there, or they're inebriated and they can't take you to a hospital, that's a life-threatening situation because you can't take care of yourself without that adult in the other room. And so when your brain is developing, it's being hardwired to believe that it needs to be in this fight or flight spot. And so we develop symptoms of trauma and PTSD from that. And so one of the most common misconceptions is that trauma is these big T traumas. When I would say a lot of people, the statistic says 1 in 3, and I would argue it might even be higher than that. People experience trauma.
Wow. And can you normalize trauma and just not even realize that it is a part of your day-to-day, or that even that fight or flight mode, is that something that someone can think is just their way of life and maybe prevent them from getting help?
Absolutely, yeah. And it works for a lot of people. Like, I think of people who are like have that really strong go-getter attitude where they're like always moving on to the next thing. That might be a trauma response where, like, when you stop, things aren't okay, so you keep going. And sometimes survival skills work really well for us, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes we see it show up in addictions. Sometimes we see it in individuals who are workaholics. And so it depends on how it's showing up for each individual. But a lot of people live with trauma and have no idea or don't realize it because it is normalized. Especially, I think of COVID. COVID was a global trauma. It was something that on a mass scale we experienced, and now we all pretend that it's not there, which is like, that's a traumatic response. We want to forget about it and move on with our lives because it was a horrible time.
Right.
Even just the division that it caused between people and the conflict that it caused in the world, and the insecurity of we don't know.
Right. Mm-hmm. As a counselor, it must be an interesting time to look back on, to see just a global response to a trauma that, I mean, it's hard to say there's any one event we all respond to as a universe at the same time, but it was something that we can look back on now and say, I was telling you before we started filming, I was in Europe this summer, and it was the first time I'd been there since COVID, and it was like nothing happened, but I felt this like collective connection to all of our desire to just move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting as a counselor because most times, like when a client comes in with a traumatic experience, I'm not experiencing it at the same time as them. Whereas with COVID, I am. Like, I went through it too.
It was a very human response.
And so it's interesting going through that alongside of my clients and then observing it from the outside and just seeing how it is affecting everyone.
For someone who's watching the show right now, maybe has been afraid to reach out anywhere, what would you say are the best tools to use, or some of the first places to go if you just want more information, maybe just want to talk to someone?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can always reach out to us through our website, and there's a contact form on there. My phone number is on the website. Anyone can reach out. We are located at the St. Stephen's University, and so even stopping by if they wanted someone to talk to. If you know, like, attending these events is really helpful because you get to see all of the people that are supporters. So then you can see, like, oh, I know, for example, Kristen Cloney, when she was running Spree, she often was like a spearheader at these events that was always like on the front lines with us. So even just seeing Kristen and saying, I need someone to talk to, I'm just going to pop into Spree and be like, do you know where I can get connected? So it's when you show up to these events, it's pay attention to who is showing up and reaching out to any one of those people to say, how can I get connected? Or anyone on the Abuse Prevention Network.
And I know especially for women, sometimes that fear of maybe having your kids taken away or not knowing what you sign up for, no one should feel that if they just reach out for help, that's necessarily going to put them down a path they can't change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's like, I don't work with I work alongside of them, they're a partner, but I'm not social development. And that's not my goal, is to take your kids away. So if you come to me to talk to me about your life, as long as your kids aren't in harm, that's not here nor there for me. And we're going to talk and figure that out together and figure out a plan together.
And finally, Stephanie, why should people who are watching right now come out to Take Back the Night on September 27th?
Yeah, I think coming out would show support, show that we're allies. If you're a survivor, it's coming out to see all of the people that are there to support you, get access to resources. And also, sexual violence doesn't just impact the individuals who experience it, it impacts all of the people that are supporting those people. So you think family members, friends, service providers, it affects us as a community when things like this happen. And so anyone that's affected by sexual violence, I want to feel welcome to come out and just see what's out there, come together as a community and just build on that community resilience.
Well, I look forward to joining you for Take Back the Night on September 27th. I appreciate your time and your knowledge. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
My guest today has been Stephanie Clarke, a sexual violence counselor at the Willow Centre, who is organizing Take Back the Night, taking place September 27th in St. Stephen, St. Andrews, and St. George. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.